The Lamborghini screamed through Malibu Canyon at 2 in the morning, its engine roaring like a wounded beast as it hugged curves that would terrify even experienced drivers. Inside, Cassidy Blake gripped the dashboard so hard her knuckles turned white, her heart hammering against her ribs as trees blurred past the windows at impossible speeds. "Killian, slow down," she screamed over the engine's roar. But the man behind the wheel only laughed, that reckless, wild laugh she'd heard too many times in the past few hours. His eyes gleamed with something dangerous, something unhinged, as he pushed the accelerator harder. The canyon road twisted ahead, a sharp turn looming in the darkness. Cassidy's stomach dropped. They weren't going to make it. Not at this speed. Then Killian's laugh cut off abruptly. His body went rigid, hands locked on the wheel as his eyes rolled back into his head. The car swerved violently, tires screeching as it careened toward the cliff edge, where 100-foot drop waited in the darkness below. Cassidy didn't think. She lunged across the center console, grabbing the wheel as Killian convulsed beside her, his foot still heavy on the accelerator. The car fishtailed, the back end sliding toward the guardrail that was the only thing between them and oblivion. She yanked the wheel hard, fighting the momentum, her arms burning with effort as the vehicle spun in a complete circle before finally skidding to a stop. Inches. They were inches from the edge. Cassidy's breath came in ragged gasps as she stared at the drop-off illuminated by the headlights. Killian slumped in his seat, coming back to consciousness with confusion clouding his features. For a moment, he didn't seem to know where he was. Then his eyes focused on the cliff edge, on how close they'd come to dying. His first words weren't gratitude. They weren't relief. Did anyone see? His voice was sharp, urgent, desperate. Cassidy turned to stare at him, her hands still shaking from adrenaline. What the hell was that? "Killian, what just happened to you?" He straightened in his seat, his face going cold and closed off in an instant. That never happened. Understand. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. They'd nearly died, and he was worried about witnesses? "You had some kind of seizure," she said, her voice rising. "You could have killed us both. It's handled." Killian shifted the car into reverse, backing away from the cliff with steady hands as though nothing had happened. "I have medication. It won't happen again. Won't happen again. You're driving like a maniac at 2 in the morning, and you're having seizures. This is insane." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her blood run cold. "You signed a contract, Ms. Blake. You knew what you were getting into. If you can't handle this, there's the door. If you're already hooked and want to see how Cassidy got into this mess with billionaire racer Killian Voss, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and let me know if you'd risk everything for someone like Killian. Now, let's go back to where this all began, just 72 hours earlier. 72 hours before that near-fatal drive, Cassidy Blake was living a completely different nightmare. The basement clinic in downtown Los Angeles was a far cry from the sterile, well-lit facilities where she'd trained during her physical therapy program at UCLA. Dingy walls, secondhand medical equipment that she'd learned to maintain herself, and clients who paid in cash because they couldn't afford or couldn't access legitimate health care. She was good at what she did, better than good. As she worked on a construction worker's shoulder that afternoon, manipulating the joint with practiced precision, she felt that familiar surge of satisfaction that came from using her knowledge to help someone. "You're better than the licensed PT I saw at the hospital," the man grunted as she released pressure on a trigger point. Cassidy smiled, but said nothing. She couldn't tell him that she'd been at the top of her class at UCLA, that her professors had predicted she'd revolutionize sports medicine, that she'd been offered positions at prestigious clinics before everything fell apart. Instead, she accepted his cash payment, $200, no receipt, no records, and watched him leave with instructions for home exercises she knew he probably wouldn't do. The apartment she returned to that evening was small and cluttered, filled with textbooks she couldn't bear to throw away and medical journals she still read religiously. But the focal point of her life was in the living room. Her father, Marcus Blake, in his wheelchair, watching television with the sound too loud because his hearing had been damaged in the same accident that had stolen his ability to walk. "Hey, Dad," she said, dropping her bag and immediately moving to help him with the leg exercises his own physical therapist had prescribed. She knew the routine better than anyone. She'd designed half of it herself, adjusting it based on his progress and setbacks. "When are you going to take that exam?" her father asked as she guided his leg through range of motion exercises. "Stop wasting your education here with me." "You're not a waste, Dad." She kept her voice light, but the guilt was a familiar weight in her chest. "We'll get there." The truth was more complicated. She was one administrative hearing and one licensing exam away from legitimacy. But the hearing required fees she didn't have, and the exam required time she couldn't spare while working enough under-the-table jobs to keep them afloat. Her father's accident 2 years ago, a construction site collapse that had crushed his spine, had happened during her final clinical practicum. She dropped everything to care for him, and in doing so, had failed to complete the requirements for her license. Now she was stuck in limbo, educated but not credentialed, skilled but not legal, helping people in the shadows while her UCLA degree collected dust on the wall. She was helping her father into bed when she heard the knock. Heavy, insistent, the kind of knock that made her stomach drop before she even opened the door. 2 men stood in the hallway, and Cassidy knew immediately they weren't there for physical therapy. They wore expensive suits that looked out of place in her Echo Park apartment building, and their polite smiles didn't reach their eyes. "Ms. Blake," the taller one said, "we represent a private lending organization. We'd like to discuss your outstanding balance. $50,000. She'd borrowed it 6 months ago from what she'd thought was a legitimate medical loan company, desperate to get her father into an experimental treatment program that conventional insurance wouldn't cover. The treatment had shown promise, real promise, but the loan had turned out to be anything but legitimate. "I need more time," Cassidy said, trying to keep her voice steady. 2 more weeks, like we agreed. "Actually, the terms have changed." The second man pulled out a tablet, showing her numbers that made her head spin. "Interest has accrued. The new total is $75,000, due in 1 week." "That's impossible. I don't have that kind of money." "We understand." The taller man's smile was shark-like. "But we're confident you'll find a way. You're a resourceful woman." His eyes drifted past her to the living room, where her UCLA degree hung on the wall. Shame to waste that education. The threat was clear even though unspoken. She'd seen what happened to people who couldn't pay these kinds of debts. After they left, Cassidy sat at her laptop until midnight, searching desperately for solutions. High-paying physical therapy jobs in Los Angeles popped up in her searches, positions that would easily cover the debt, but they all required one thing she didn't have: a valid license. She considered dangerous options: more loans, consolidation schemes that looked barely legal, even reaching out to former classmates who might help. But each path led to the same dead end. At 12:30 a.m., exhausted and hopeless, she left the apartment to walk to the clinic. Sometimes organizing her medical supplies helped her think. She was 2 blocks away when the black SUV pulled up, blocking her path. 2 different men, different suits, different energy. These weren't loan sharks. They were professionals. "Ms. Blake," one said, "Mr. Voss would like a word." "I don't know any Mr. Voss." "He knows you. It's about an employment opportunity. Very lucrative." Every instinct screamed at her to run, but something made her hesitate. Employment opportunity. Lucrative. She thought of the $75,000, of her father's treatment, of the life she'd lost and desperately wanted back. Against her better judgment, she got in the SUV. The drive to Malibu felt endless. Cassidy sat in the back of the SUV, watching Los Angeles transform from the gritty streets of downtown to the manicured wealth of the coast. The men who'd picked her up said nothing, their silence more unnerving than any threat. When they finally pulled up to a glass and steel mansion perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, Cassidy's anxiety doubled. She'd seen places like this in magazines, never imagining she'd actually enter one. Inside, the office was all clean lines and expensive minimalism. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the moonlit ocean, and behind a massive desk sat a man who could only be Killian Voss. She recognized him immediately. Everyone in Los Angeles knew Killian Voss, heir to Voss Motorsports, former Formula One driver, tabloid fixture. But the magazines didn't capture the intensity of him in person. He was handsome in that careless way wealthy men often were. But there was something damaged in his eyes, something desperate beneath the arrogance. "Ms. Blake," he said, not bothering to stand. "Thank you for coming. I didn't have much choice." A slight smile. "True. But you're here, and that's what matters." He gestured to a chair. Please sit. We have business to discuss. Cassidy remained standing. What kind of business? Killian opened a folder on his desk, and Cassidy's blood ran cold. Inside were photos of her, leaving her apartment, entering the clinic, treating clients. There were copies of her transcripts from UCLA, her incomplete licensing paperwork, even details about her father's accident. How did you? I'm very thorough when hiring. Killian interrupted. Cassidy Blake, 28 years old. Graduated top of your class from UCLA's physical therapy program 3 years ago. Failed to complete clinical licensing requirements when your father's construction accident derailed your final practicum. 1 administrative hearing and 1 exam away from legitimacy. He looked up. Currently operating an illegal practice out of a basement in downtown LA, treating clients for cash. $50,000 in debt to some very dangerous people. Actually, $75,000 now, isn't it? The casual way he recited her life made her feel violated and exposed. What do you want? To offer you a job. Killian closed the folder. 6 months as my girlfriend and personal physical therapist. You'll live here, accompany me to public events, and demonstrate to my company's board of directors that I've made a complete recovery from my racing accident. Recovery from what? 8 months ago, I crashed during the Bahrain Grand Prix. The official story is that I'm taking time away from racing to focus on the family business. The truth is more complicated. He stood, and Cassidy noticed a slight hitch in his gait that he tried to hide. I have nerve damage in my left leg. Seizures. The board thinks I'm permanently incapacitated. In 6 months, there's a mandatory medical evaluation. If I fail, I lose control of the company. So you want me to lie? I want you to help me prove I'm capable of running Voss Motorsports, the company my father built. His voice hardened. In exchange, I'll pay you $300,000. I'll fund your licensing exam, provide the required clinical supervision hours through my foundation, and clear any administrative barriers. You'll walk away with everything you need to practice legally. The number made her dizzy. $300,000. It would pay off the debt, cover her father's continued treatment, and give her the credentials she'd lost. Everything she'd sacrificed could be restored. This is insane, she said. It's fraud. It's also your father's life. Killian's expression didn't change. Those men who visited you today? They won't wait a week. But I can make them disappear tonight. Your father gets his treatment. You get your license. All you have to do is lie convincingly for 6 months. Cassidy felt the trap closing around her. Why me? You could hire anyone. Because you're desperate enough to say yes, skilled enough to make it believable, and smart enough to know when you have no other choice. He pushed a contract across the desk. Read it. It's all there. She picked up the document with shaking hands. It was surprisingly detailed and professional. Payment schedule, duties, confidentiality clauses, termination conditions. This wasn't some impulsive scheme. He'd planned this carefully. What happens in 6 months after the board evaluation? We go our separate ways. You get your money, I keep my company. Everyone wins. And if they find out the truth? They won't. Not if we're both committed to this. Killian's eyes locked on hers. I'm offering you everything you've lost, Ms. Blake. Your career, your father's health, your future. The only question is whether you're willing to take it. Cassidy stared at the contract. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, illegal. But the photos of her father's ransacked apartment, the ones Killian had shown her on his phone, taken by the loan sharks earlier that day, flashed in her mind. The experimental treatment that was actually working. The license that would let her practice the profession she loved. She thought about the basement clinic, the cash payments, the constant fear of being caught. She was already living a lie. At least this one paid well. Her hand reached for the pen on his desk. Let's get one thing straight, she said as she signed her name. This is business. Nothing more. Killian extended his hand across the desk. Absolutely. Business. She hesitated, then shook it. His grip was firm, his palm warm against hers. The contract sat between them, her signature still drying. Welcome to my world, Ms. Blake, he said. Cassidy had no idea she'd just made a deal with a man who was already dying, or that in 72 hours, she'd be fighting for both their lives on a dark canyon road. The next morning, Cassidy arrived at the Malibu mansion with a single suitcase containing everything she owned that seemed appropriate for her new role. Designer clothes weren't in her wardrobe, but Killian had assured her that would be handled. A stern-faced man in his late 50s met her at the door. He had military bearing and eyes that missed nothing. Marcus Chun, head of security, he introduced himself. I'll show you to your room. As they walked through the sprawling mansion, Cassidy noticed how Marcus watched her, his expression unreadable but clearly suspicious. How long have you worked for Mr. Voss? She asked, trying to break the ice. I worked for his father first. 20 years with the family. There was something protective in his tone. I take my responsibility to Killian very seriously. The implication was clear. He'd be watching her closely. Her room was larger than her entire apartment, with its own bathroom and a balcony overlooking the ocean. She was still unpacking when a woman appeared in the doorway, mid-30s, polished to perfection, with a smile that never reached her eyes. Nina Reeves, Mr. Voss's assistant. She extended a manicured hand. I manage his schedule, his public relations, and now, apparently you. Cassidy shook her hand, noting the coldness of Nina's grip. I'm here as his physical therapist. Of course. Nina's smile tightened. I'll be monitoring your work closely. Mr. Voss's health is paramount, and we can't afford any complications. She pulled out her phone, snapping a photo of Cassidy's medical bag on the bed. Just documenting everything for the board. You understand. Before Cassidy could object, Nina was gone, leaving behind a distinct feeling of being under surveillance. That evening, a team of stylists descended on Cassidy's room. They brought racks of designer dresses, shoes that cost more than she used to make in a month, and jewelry that made her nervous to touch. A woman named Claudia worked on her hair while explaining that Cassidy would need to look the part of Killian Voss's girlfriend. You're attending a charity gala tonight, Claudia said, pinning Cassidy's hair into an elegant updo. Your debut as a couple. Killian appeared as the stylists were finishing, leaning against the doorframe in a tailored tuxedo. We need to go over our story, he said. After the stylists left, he sat across from her, coaching her with the precision of a director rehearsing an actor. We met 3 months ago when you were treating my business partner's wife for a sports injury. I was there visiting, we started talking, and I was immediately drawn to your intelligence and passion for healing. How romantic, Cassidy said dryly. He ignored the sarcasm. You've been working with me privately since then. The progress has been remarkable. We fell in love over our shared commitment to recovery and second chances. And people will believe this. They'll believe what they see. Killian stood, offering his hand. Just smile, look at me adoringly, and let me do the talking. Can you manage that? Cassidy took his hand, standing in the unfamiliar high heels. I'm a better actress than you think. The Beverly Hills Charity Gala was overwhelming. Cameras flashed as they arrived, Killian's hand possessive on her waist. He leaned in close, whispering something that looked intimate but was actually instructions. Keep your left hand visible. They need to see us touching. Inside, the ballroom glittered with Los Angeles' elite. Cassidy recognized actors, tech moguls, and politicians. Everyone seemed to know Killian, and everyone was curious about her. He played his part perfectly, introducing her with pride, touching her constantly, a hand on her back, fingers intertwined with hers, an arm around her shoulders. To the outside world, they looked like a couple deeply in love. Then she met Archer Kane. He was silver-haired and charismatic, probably in his late 40s, with a warmth that seemed genuine as he embraced Killian like a son. So proud of you, Kill, he said, then turned to Cassidy. And you must be the miracle worker I've heard about. Cassidy Blake, she said, shaking his hand. Archer Kane, Voss Motorsports' longest-serving partner. His smile was disarming. Killian's father and I built this company from nothing. I've known this young man since he was in diapers. Throughout the evening, Archer was attentive and kind, asking about her background and seeming genuinely interested in her work. But later, as Cassidy stepped out onto a terrace for air, he followed her. Can I speak with you privately? He asked, his voice serious now. Of course. Archer's expression shifted from public warmth to private concern. Be careful with him, Miss Blake. Killian's not well, mentally or physically. His father's death 3 years ago broke something in him. He's pushing himself too hard, trying to prove something that doesn't need proving. He seems determined to recover. That's what worries me. Archer looked back toward the ballroom where Killian was talking to investors. If you truly care about him, you'll convince him to step down before he hurts himself. The company will be fine. I promised his father I'd take care of everything. But Killian, he needs to accept his limitations. The concern in Archer's voice seemed real, but something about the conversation unsettled Cassidy. Was he genuinely worried, or was there another agenda? I'll keep that in mind, she said carefully. Back at the mansion near midnight, Cassidy found herself in Killian's private gym, a state-of-the-art facility that would make professional sports teams envious. It was time for their first real therapy session. Let's see what we're working with, she said, falling into her professional mode. Killian removed his jacket and dress pants, revealing the custom brace hidden beneath. Cassidy's trained eye immediately assessed the severity. The nerve damage was significant, his reflexes delayed, his range of motion compromised. As she examined his leg, asking clinical questions and performing standard tests, she noticed pill bottles partially hidden behind gym equipment. She walked over, picking them up. Keppra, Dilantin, anti-seizure medications, and others, stimulants that made her stomach drop. What are these for? She demanded. Killian's face went defensive. Caught. That's none of your business. It absolutely is my business. I'm supposed to be your physical therapist, and you're taking medications that could. That could what? Keep me functional? Keep me alive? His voice rose. You want the truth, Ms. Blake? Let's talk about the truth. Killian's expression was a mixture of anger and resignation as he faced Cassidy in the gym. The expensive equipment around them suddenly felt like props in an elaborate stage play where both of them were trapped in their roles. The crash in Bahrain wasn't just about nerve damage, he said finally, his voice low. I've been having seizures since then. Unpredictable. Dangerous. The medications keep them mostly under control, but stress triggers them. Cassidy felt her professional alarm bells ringing. You could have a seizure at any moment? That's why I need you. To prove to the board that I'm fine, that I'm capable of running the company. This isn't just fraud anymore, Cassidy said, her voice shaking. This is dangerous. If you have a seizure in public, people could die. I can't be part of this. She turned to leave, but Killian's calm voice stopped her. Check your bank account. What? Your bank account. Check it. Cassidy pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. When she opened her banking app, she nearly dropped the device. $100,000 had been deposited that evening. Your father's treatment started today, Killian said matter-of-factly. Best facility in Los Angeles. Fully funded. The loan sharks have been paid off. They won't be bothering you again. Cassidy stared at him, fury and desperation warring inside her. You manipulative. I'm practical, he interrupted. You're already complicit, Ms. Blake. Your father is receiving care bought with my money, for a lie you're already living. The gala tonight? You played your part beautifully. We're in this together now, whether you like it or not. The trap had closed completely. Cassidy wanted to scream, to throw the money back at him, to run. But the image of her father's face when she'd video called him earlier that evening, the hope in his eyes as he described the new facility, the better equipment, the specialized therapists, kept her frozen in place. I could report you, she said weakly. You could, and then explain to investigators how you accepted $100,000 and attended a public event as my girlfriend. How you've been practicing physical therapy without a license for 2 years. Killian's voice wasn't cruel, just honest. We both have too much to lose now. Cassidy sank onto a weight bench, the fight draining out of her. Why are you doing this? Why risk everything? For the first time, Killian's mask cracked. He sat down across from her, and she saw genuine pain in his eyes. Because Voss Motorsports is all I have left of my father. He built this company from nothing, and I'll be damned if I let it slip away because of some medical evaluation. In 6 months, I just need to prove I'm capable. After that, you're free. And if you have a seizure before then we deal with it. He stood, ending the conversation. Get some rest, Ms. Blake. Tomorrow, we start the real work. That night, alone in her luxurious room, Cassidy video called her father. He was settled into his new facility, practically glowing with excitement. Cass, this place is incredible, he said, showing her around via the phone's camera. They're starting a new treatment protocol tomorrow. The doctor says with this level of care, I could regain significant mobility in my legs. That's wonderful, Dad. I don't know how you afforded this, her father continued, his voice thick with emotion. But thank you. I know you've sacrificed so much for me already. Cassidy forced a smile, guilt eating at her insides. You're worth it. After they hung up, she sat in the darkness of her room, listening to the ocean waves crash against the cliffs below. She'd traded her integrity for her father's health, and there was no going back now. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt surreal. Days were spent in intense physical therapy sessions with Killian, where Cassidy used every technique she'd learned at UCLA to strengthen his damaged leg, improve his balance, and work around his neurological issues. She designed programs specifically for nerve damage, using her clinical training to push him without triggering seizures. Nights were spent at glamorous events, restaurant openings, gallery exhibitions, exclusive parties in the Hollywood Hills. They were photographed everywhere, their romance documented on social media and gossip sites. Killian played the devoted boyfriend perfectly, and Cassidy learned to match his performance. But it was the in-between moments that became dangerous. Late one night, after a particularly grueling therapy session, they sat together in his home theater, too exhausted to move. In the darkness, with no cameras and no audience, their carefully maintained walls started to crack. "Why did you really take this deal?" Killian asked quietly. "You could have run from the loan sharks, disappeared. People do it." Cassidy considered lying, then decided he deserved honesty. "I'm tired of running from problems. My whole life, I've taken shortcuts, avoided the hard path. When my dad got injured, it was because I convinced him to take a dangerous construction job that paid more. I thought the money would help us get ahead." Her voice broke slightly. "Instead, it destroyed his life. This time, I'm seeing it through, whatever the cost." Killian was quiet for a long moment. "Everyone I've ever trusted has left," he finally said. "My mother abandoned us when I was 6. Said she couldn't handle the pressure of being married to a racing mogul. My father died when I was 25, mechanical failure during a private test drive. Every girlfriend I've had sold stories to tabloids the moment we broke up. So you don't trust anyone." "I trust contracts. Money. Things that are clear and transactional." He turned to look at her in the darkness. "This thing between us, it has to stay business, Cassidy. I can't afford to blur those lines." "Neither can I," she agreed, even as something in her chest tightened. But the lines were already blurring, and both of them knew it. The video conference with the Voss Motorsports board happened 6 weeks into their arrangement. Cassidy sat in Killian's office, nervous energy crackling through her as faces appeared on the large screen. 10 board members, each more intimidating than the last. She'd prepared meticulously for this presentation, using proper medical terminology and assessment criteria that would satisfy even the most skeptical observer. As she spoke about Killian's progress, she demonstrated the coached movements they'd practiced for hours. He walked without visible limping. His reflexes appeared normal. His strength tests came back positive. But one director, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Patricia Chun, wasn't convinced. "His reaction times are still slower than baseline measurements from before the accident," she pointed out, pulling up data on her own screen. Cassidy's heart raced, but before she could respond, Archer Kane's voice cut through the tension. "Let's give him more time," Archer said from his own video square, his expression supportive. "He's clearly improving under Ms. Blake's care. 3 more months before we make any final decisions seems reasonable." Other board members murmured agreement, and eventually, the vote passed. Killian had his extension. After the call ended, Cassidy exhaled in relief. But something about Archer's intervention bothered her. He'd been too helpful, too quick to defend Killian when he'd previously suggested Killian should step down. That afternoon, Archer arrived at the mansion in person. Cassidy was in the hallway organizing medical supplies when she heard voices from Killian's office. "I'm proud of you, Kill," Archer was saying. "Your father would be proud too. But please, don't push too hard. The company isn't worth your life." "The company is all I have left of him," Killian replied, his voice tight with emotion. "You have me. I promised your father I'd take care of you." There was a pause, then the sound of an embrace. "We're family, you and I." Cassidy moved away before they could discover her eavesdropping, but the conversation left her confused. Archer seemed genuinely caring, yet Marcus had mentioned tensions between Archer and Killian's father before the fatal crash. Which version of Archer was real? 2 days later, Nina caught Cassidy coming out of the gym late at night. "Still here?" Nina asked, her tone casual but her eyes calculating. "Just finished a session with Killian. You two spend a lot of time together." Nina's smile was thin. "I hope you remember this as a professional arrangement." "Of course." "Good. Because Mr. Voss has a pattern of confusing professional relationships with personal ones." His last physical therapist quit after he became too attached. Nina stepped closer. I'd hate to see you get hurt, Cassidy. Or worse, compromise the medical evaluation with emotional complications. After Nina left, Cassidy found herself unsettled. Was Nina warning her out of genuine concern, or was there something else going on? The answer came a week later when Cassidy found Nina in her medical office, photographing her assessment notes. What are you doing? Cassidy demanded, shutting the door. Nina didn't even look guilty. Just keeping detailed records for the board. You understand. These are confidential medical records. Mr. Voss has given me full access to all house operations. Nina slipped her phone into her pocket. Unless there's something in these notes you don't want the board to see. The threat was clear. Cassidy stood her ground. Get out of my office. Nina smiled, but complied, leaving Cassidy staring at the files she'd been photographing. Notes about Killian's seizure patterns, his medication dosages, the moments when his condition seemed to worsen under stress. If Nina was reporting to someone, Killian's condition was no longer a secret. That night, Cassidy couldn't sleep. She wandered down to the kitchen at 3 in the morning and found Marcus making coffee. Rough night? He asked, offering her a cup. Something like that. They sat in companionable silence for a moment before Marcus spoke. You're different from the others. Others? Mr. Voss has had companions before. Models, actresses, socialites. You actually seem to care whether he lives or dies. Cassidy wrapped her hands around the warm mug. I'm his physical therapist. Of course I care. Marcus studied her with those sharp eyes that saw too much. Is that all you are? She didn't answer because she wasn't sure anymore. The boundaries between professional and personal had been eroding with every late-night conversation, every shared meal, every moment when Killian let his guard down and showed her the damaged, vulnerable person beneath the arrogant facade. Be careful, Marcus said quietly. This family has a way of consuming people who get too close. Speaking from experience, I loved Killian's father like a brother. I failed to protect him when it mattered most. Marcus's expression hardened. I won't fail his son. Before Cassidy could ask what he meant, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Monaco Grand Prix in 2 weeks. Pack formal wear. K. Monaco. The most glamorous race on the Formula One calendar, where billionaires played and cameras captured everything. Cassidy's stomach dropped. This arrangement had been difficult enough in Los Angeles, where she could retreat to her room and maintain some distance. 2 weeks in Monaco, playing Killian's devoted girlfriend in front of the entire racing world, would test every boundary they'd been trying to maintain. She looked at Marcus. Has he been to Monaco since the crash? No. He's been avoiding it. Too many memories. Marcus's expression was grim. If he's going now, he's trying to prove something. Probably something dangerous. The next morning, Killian confirmed it over breakfast. Archer arranged VIP access to the Monaco Grand Prix. He said casually, as if this weren't a massive deal. We'll attend the race weekend, do some press, show the world I'm back. Is that wise? The stress. I'll be fine. His tone left no room for argument. This is non-negotiable, Cassidy. Pack your bags. As she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that Monaco would change everything. The private jet landed in Nice on a perfect Mediterranean afternoon, and a helicopter whisked them to Monaco. Cassidy pressed her face to the window, watching the tiny principality unfold below, yachts crowding the harbor, the famous casino, the narrow streets winding up hillsides where every building cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime. Killian sat across from her, seemingly relaxed, but she'd learned to read the subtle signs of his tension. The way his jaw clenched, how his fingers tapped against his thigh. He was nervous, though he'd never admit it. Nina sat behind them, ever present, her phone constantly clicking as she documented everything. Marcus coordinated security from the cockpit, speaking in low tones with the pilot. The Hotel de Paris Monte Carlo was everything Cassidy had seen in movies and more. Paparazzi lined the entrance, cameras flashing as their helicopter landed on the roof. Killian's hand found hers as they descended, his grip tight. Remember, he whispered, we're in love. Make them believe it. The penthouse suite took Cassidy's breath away. Marble floors, antique furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Mediterranean. But as she explored, she discovered a problem. One bedroom. There's been a mistake, she told the concierge who'd escorted them up. No mistake, mademoiselle. Mr. Kane made the reservation himself. One penthouse suite, as requested. After the con left, Cassidy turned to find Nina watching with barely concealed amusement. Archer arranged the accommodations personally, Nina said. I'm sure it was an oversight. The smirk on her face suggested otherwise. Killian examined the suite's layout. A massive bedroom, a living area, and a couch that looked expensive but deeply uncomfortable. I'll take the couch, he said. Don't be ridiculous. It's your reservation. I'm not letting you sleep on a couch. They argued until exhaustion set in, both too proud to concede. As night fell over Monaco, they retreated to separate rooms, but sleep proved elusive. Cassidy lay in the enormous bed, hyper-aware that Killian was just beyond the door, equally unable to rest. At 3 a.m, she gave up and stepped onto the balcony for air. The view was breathtaking, the harbor glittering below, yachts bobbing gently, the famous casino lit up like a jewel. She wasn't alone long. Killian appeared, looking as restless as she felt. Can't sleep, he asked. Too much going on in my head. They stood side by side, the Mediterranean breeze warm on their skin. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Killian broke the silence. My father died 3 years ago, he said quietly. Mechanical failure during a private test at a track in Bahrain. The official investigation called it an accident, but he trailed off, staring at the dark water. But what? But he was the most careful driver I ever knew. Obsessive about maintenance, about safety protocols. A random mechanical failure didn't make sense. Killian's hands gripped the balcony railing. Archer stepped up immediately after the crash. Helped run the company during my grief, made all the right decisions, kept everything stable. He was my father's best friend. They built Voss Motorsports together from nothing. Cassidy heard something in his voice, not quite suspicion, but not quite trust either. You don't sound entirely convinced about the accident. I was 25 and devastated. I didn't ask the right questions. I just accepted what I was told. The vulnerability in his admission made Cassidy's chest ache. She reached out, placing her hand over his on the railing. He didn't pull away. They talked until dawn painted the sky pink and gold, sharing stories about their fathers, about loss, about the weight of expectations. Somewhere during those hours, they ended up sitting on the outdoor couch, their exhaustion finally catching up. Cassidy woke to sunlight on her face and the realization that she was curled against Killian's chest, his arm around her shoulders. Their legs were tangled together, intimate in a way that had nothing to do with their contract. His eyes opened at the same moment. For several heartbeats, neither moved. Then reality crashed back, and they separated awkwardly, retreating to opposite ends of the balcony. We fell asleep, Cassidy said unnecessarily. Yeah. Killian ran a hand through his hair. We should get ready. Busy day. They didn't speak about waking up in each other's arms. They didn't acknowledge how natural it had felt. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. Yacht parties in the harbor where champagne flowed and celebrities mingled. The Paddock Club at Circuit de Monaco, where Killian introduced her to Formula One legends who treated him like a returning hero. The Casino de Monte Carlo, where she wore a dress that cost more than her first car and pretended to understand baccarat. Nina was always there, camera in hand, documenting everything. Cassidy noticed her paying particular attention whenever Killian seemed tired or stressed, as if waiting for him to show weakness. But it was Killian himself who worried Cassidy most. She'd been monitoring his medication, and he was running low. The stress of Monaco was clearly affecting him. She could see it in the tremor in his hands that he tried to hide, the way his left leg dragged slightly when he thought no one was watching. On their second evening, they attended a formal dinner at an exclusive restaurant overlooking the harbor. Cassidy was making small talk with the sponsor's wife when a loud, slurred voice cut through the elegant atmosphere. Voss, heard you can barely walk straight these days. A former Formula One driver, clearly drunk, had spotted Killian from across the restaurant. The man was in his 50s, once famous, but now reduced to trading on past glory at events like this. Shame to see a legend reduced to a cripple playing CEO, the man continued, stumbling closer. Other diners were staring now, phones emerging from pockets and purses. Killian stood abruptly, his whole body trembling. Cassidy saw it immediately. The tremor wasn't just anger. His hands were shaking in a way that signaled something worse. The medication withdrawal, the stress, his neurological condition, They were all converging. Cassidy moved before thinking, sliding between Killian and the drunk driver with a bright smile plastered on her face. She laughed, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, as if this were all a hilarious misunderstanding. "You must have Killian confused with someone else," she said cheerfully, linking her arm through Killian's. She could feel him shaking against her. "He's been kicking my ass in tennis all week. I'm the one who can barely walk." The man blinked, confused by her response. Cassidy didn't give him time to recover. She turned to Killian, keeping her voice light but her grip firm on his arm. "Darling, didn't you say we had that call with the New York office? We should go." She guided him toward the exit, moving quickly but not so fast that it would seem like fleeing. Behind them, she heard the restaurant manager apologizing to other guests, the drunk man being escorted out a different door. Once they reached the street, Killian pulled away from her, his breathing ragged. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're about to have an episode. I can handle it." But his words were slurred slightly, his pupils dilating in the wrong way. Cassidy flagged down their driver, practically pushing Killian into the car. "Hotel. Now." The drive back felt endless. Killian slumped in the seat, fighting whatever was happening inside his brain. Cassidy held his hand, monitoring his pulse, watching for the telltale signs of a full seizure. They made it to the suite just as his legs gave out. Cassidy caught him, guiding him to the couch, her physical therapy training kicking in. She knew exactly how to position him, how to keep him safe as the tremors racked his body. It wasn't a full seizure, but it was close. His medication had been stretched too thin, and Monaco's stress had pushed him to the edge. When it finally passed, Killian lay on the couch, pale and exhausted. Cassidy sat beside him, her hand still holding his. "You need to increase your dosage," she said quietly. "Can't. It makes me too drowsy. I need to be sharp for the meetings tomorrow." "Killian, you almost seized in a restaurant full of cameras." "But I didn't. Thanks to you." He turned his head to look at her. "You saved me." Again. The vulnerability in his eyes made something crack open inside Cassidy's chest. This wasn't the arrogant billionaire who'd blackmailed her into this arrangement. This was someone terrified and trying desperately not to show it. "Why are we really here?" she asked. "This isn't just about showing the world you're recovered. What are you trying to prove?" Killian was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Archer arranged a private test tomorrow morning. At the track. Before the race." Cassidy's blood ran cold. "Absolutely not. You're in no condition. I need this." He sat up, though the effort clearly cost him. "I need to know if I can still drive. If I'm still me. You could die trying to find out." "I'm dying anyway, Cassidy. These seizures, the neurological damage. My doctor gave me 5 years, maybe less. Every day, I'm losing pieces of myself." His voice broke. "I just need to know if the part of me that mattered is still there." Cassidy wanted to argue, to forbid it, to drag him back to Los Angeles and away from this dangerous nostalgia. But looking into his desperate eyes, she understood. Racing wasn't just what he did, it was who he was. And he needed to know if that person still existed. "Fine," she said against every instinct. "But I'm coming. And if I see anything wrong, you stop immediately. Deal?" Neither of them moved from the couch. Killian's head rested against the cushions, Cassidy's hand still in his. The Mediterranean night stretched around them, full of possibility and danger. "Tell me about your father," Cassidy said softly. "Not the public story. The real one." Killian's eyes closed. "He was larger than life. Started Voss Motorsports in a garage when I was 3. Worked 18-hour days, risked everything, built an empire from nothing. He and Archer were inseparable, best friends, business partners, closer than brothers." A pause. "But a few months before he died, something changed. They started arguing. I'd hear them late at night in his office. Something about contracts, about technology sales that weren't what they seemed." "What kind of technology?" "I don't know. I was too busy racing, too focused on my own career to pay attention to company politics." Regret colored his voice. "The last conversation I had with my father was an argument. He wanted me to come to Bahrain to watch the test. I said I was too busy preparing for Monaco. He died alone on that track, and I never got to say goodbye." Cassidy squeezed his hand. "That's not your fault, isn't it? If I'd been there, maybe I would have noticed something wrong with the car. Maybe I could have stopped it. Or maybe you'd have died too." She shifted closer to him. "You can't carry that guilt forever, Killian." He opened his eyes, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You understand," he said quietly. "About guilt. About failing the people you love." "Yeah, I understand." They were close now, so close she could count his eyelashes, see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes. The air between them felt electric, charged with weeks of forced proximity and carefully maintained boundaries that were crumbling with every shared secret. "This thing between us," Killian said, his voice rough. "It's getting complicated. It was always going to get complicated. We have a contract. I know. We can't." But his protest died as Cassidy leaned in, closing the last few inches between them. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, both of them testing whether this was real or just another performance. Then Killian's hand came up to cup her face, and tentative became desperate. Weeks of tension, of denial, of pretending they were just business partners exploded into something neither could control. They broke apart gasping, foreheads pressed together, hearts racing. Cassidy's fingers were tangled in Killian's hair, his hands gripping her waist like he was afraid she'd disappear. "This is a bad idea," Killian whispered, but he didn't let go. "Terrible idea," Cassidy agreed, and kissed him again. This time was different, hungrier, more urgent. Months of carefully maintained distance dissolved as they gave in to what had been building since that first night in his office. Cassidy shifted closer, practically in his lap now, and Killian's hand slid up her back, pulling her against him. Then he winced, a sharp intake of breath that had nothing to do with desire. Cassidy pulled back immediately. "Your leg. It's fine." "It's not fine. You almost had a seizure an hour ago." She moved off him, creating distance even as everything in her protested. "We can't do this. Not tonight. Not when you're in this condition." Killian started to argue, then seemed to deflate. He knew she was right. "You're always saving me from myself. Someone has to." Cassidy stood, putting more space between them before her resolve crumbled. "Get some sleep. You have a dangerous morning ahead." She retreated to the bedroom, closing the door between them. But sleep was impossible. She could still feel his lips on hers, his hands on her skin, the desperation in the way he'd held her. This wasn't part of the contract. This wasn't supposed to be real. But it was real, terrifyingly real, and Cassidy had no idea what to do about it. Dawn came too quickly. At 6 a.m., they arrived at Circuit de Monaco in tense silence, neither acknowledging what had happened the night before. The private track access Archer had arranged meant they had the legendary circuit to themselves, the streets empty and waiting. A sleek Voss Motorsports prototype car sat in the pit lane, its engine already warm. Marcus was there, coordinating security, his expression grim as he saw Cassidy setting up medical monitoring equipment. Nina appeared with camera gear. "Mr. Kane asked me to document this for the board," she said, already filming. Cassidy attached a discreet monitoring device to Killian's wrist beneath his racing suit. "I'll be watching your vitals," she told him quietly. "Any irregularities, and you pull in immediately." He nodded, but she could see the excitement building in him. This was what he'd been missing: the speed, the control, the pure adrenaline of racing. The first lap was perfect. Cassidy watched from the pit, monitoring the telemetry on her tablet. Killian's heart rate was elevated but manageable, his movements smooth and precise. When he flashed past the pit straight, she could see him smiling behind the helmet visor. The second lap was even faster. He was alive out there in a way she'd never seen, every movement fluid and confident. Marcus stood beside her, watching with an expression that mixed pride and concern. "He's good," Marcus said quietly. "Still has it." The third lap started strong, but then Cassidy noticed something on her monitor. She frowned, zooming in on the data. "Something's wrong with the car." "What do you mean?" She showed Marcus the telemetry. "The braking system. See these irregular patterns? There are brief delays in response time. It shouldn't be doing that." Marcus examined the data, his military training showing in how quickly he assessed the situation. His face went pale. "Flag him in. Now." But Killian was already completing the lap, bringing the car smoothly back to the pit. When he climbed out, he was exhilarated, practically glowing. "See," he said, pulling off his helmet. "I'm fine. Better than fine. I'm still me." Cassidy wanted to share his joy, but the telemetry bothered her. Marcus was already examining the car's computer system, his movements urgent and discreet. While Killian did a brief interview with Nina's camera, Marcus pulled Cassidy aside. showing her something on a diagnostic tablet. Someone accessed this car's system recently, he said in a low voice. Look at these digital fingerprints. Someone tried to install override software on the brake system. Cassidy's blood ran cold. What kind of override? The kind that would allow remote control of the brakes. But it wasn't completed. Either they didn't finish installing it, or it failed to activate. Marcus's jaw was tight. Someone tried to sabotage this test. Who has access to these cars? Very few people. Senior engineers, Archer Kane. He trailed off, the implication hanging heavy between them. Cassidy thought about Archer's supportive words, his concern for Killian's health, his insistence that Killian should step down. Was it genuine care, or was there something darker underneath? What do we do? She asked. For now, nothing. We have no proof, and accusing Archer without evidence would destroy Killian. Marcus pocketed his tablet. But we watch. Carefully. They returned to the hotel in a strange mood. Killian euphoric from the drive. Cassidy and Marcus exchanging worried glances he didn't notice. Nina had disappeared to process the footage, leaving the three of them alone. Back in the suite, Killian grabbed Cassidy's hand, pulling her toward the balcony. The adrenaline from driving was still pumping through him, his eyes bright with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Thank you, he said. For what? For letting me do that. For not trying to stop me. He cupped her face with both hands. For seeing me as more than just a patient or a business arrangement. Killian. He kissed her, and this time there was no hesitation from either of them. This time, Cassidy didn't pull away with medical concerns. This time, she kissed him back with everything she'd been holding in for weeks. They stumbled backward into the suite, hands everywhere, mouths desperate. The expensive furniture became obstacles they navigated blindly, focused only on each other. Are you sure? Killian asked against her lips, giving her one last chance to stop this. Cassidy answered by pulling him toward the bedroom. Cassidy woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom windows and Killian's arm draped across her waist. For a moment, she let herself enjoy the warmth of his body against hers, the peaceful expression on his sleeping face, the way his breathing was slow and steady. Then reality crashed in. They'd crossed every line, shattered every boundary they'd established. The contract sitting in a safe back in Los Angeles suddenly felt like a legal document from another lifetime. Killian stirred, his eyes opening. When he saw her watching him, a slow smile crossed his face. Hey yourself. He pulled her closer, kissing her shoulder. No regrets. Cassidy considered lying, then decided they'd had enough deception between them. Terrified, but no regrets. Same. He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with an intensity that made her heart skip. This changes things. Everything. The contract. Can go to hell. Cassidy finished. I'm not doing this because you're paying me anymore, Killian. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, or hope. Good. Because I don't want to pay you to care about me. They stayed in bed longer than they should have, talking quietly, learning each other in ways that had nothing to do with physical therapy or public performances. Killian told her about his mother's abandonment, about growing up trying to earn his father's approval through racing. Cassidy shared stories about her mother's death from cancer when she was 15, about becoming her father's caretaker while still in high school. Eventually, reality intruded. They had a flight back to Los Angeles that afternoon, and Nina was already texting about departure times. On the plane, Marcus sat across from them, his expression unreadable but his eyes sharp. He'd noticed the change between them, the way Killian's hand found Cassidy's without thinking, how she leaned into him during turbulence, the quiet intimacy that couldn't be faked. Nina noticed too, her camera clicking more frequently, her expression calculating. Back in Los Angeles, Cassidy threw herself into researching the telemetry data from Monaco. She couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus was right. Someone had tried to sabotage that test. But who and why? She contacted Diego, the hacker who'd helped her before, meeting him at the same downtown coffee shop. I need you to look at something, she said, handing him a USB drive with encrypted copies of the car's system files that Marcus had provided. Diego examined the data on his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. After several minutes, he whistled low. This is sophisticated. Corporate-level encryption. Someone with serious resources and technical knowledge installed malware designed to override the brake system. Can you trace who did it? Give me 48 hours. He copied the files to his own encrypted drive. But Cassidy, this is serious. If someone's trying to kill your client, he's not just my client anymore. Diego looked up, reading something in her expression. Be careful. People who install this kind of malware don't stop after one failed attempt. Back at the mansion, Cassidy found Nina in her medical office again, this time not even trying to hide what she was doing. She had Cassidy's files spread across the desk, photographing everything. Get out, Cassidy said coldly. Nina didn't move. These notes about his seizure patterns are very interesting. The board will want to see them. Those are confidential medical records. Not when they concern the CEO's fitness to run a multi-billion-dollar company. Nina looked up, and there was something desperate in her eyes that Cassidy hadn't seen before. You don't understand what's at stake here. Then explain it to me. For a moment, Nina seemed to waver, as if deciding whether to trust Cassidy. Then her phone buzzed, and whatever moment of vulnerability had existed disappeared. I have to go, she said, gathering the files and leaving quickly. That night, Cassidy couldn't sleep. She went to Killian's office, hoping to find something, anything, that might explain what was happening. She started going through company files on his computer, looking for maintenance records from the Monaco test. She found encrypted folders she couldn't access and copied them to a USB drive for Diego to crack later. But one folder wasn't encrypted, labeled simply Dad, Final Test. Inside were investigation reports from Killian's father's fatal crash 3 years ago. Cassidy read through them, her medical training allowing her to understand the technical language. The official conclusion was mechanical failure, a brake malfunction during a high-speed turn. But something caught her eye. The crash reconstruction showed brake failure, but the pattern was wrong. The brakes hadn't worn out or malfunctioned randomly. They'd been overridden, shut off completely at the worst possible moment. Just like what someone had tried to do to Killian in Monaco. Cassidy's hands shook as she copied these files too. This wasn't paranoia. Someone had killed Killian's father and made it look like an accident. And now they were trying to do the same to Killian. She was so focused on the files that she didn't hear Killian enter until he spoke. What are you doing? She spun around, guilt written all over her face. But when she saw his expression, she realized he wasn't angry. He was terrified. I found something, she said quietly. About your father's crash. Killian crossed to the computer, reading over her shoulder. As he absorbed the information, his face went pale. The brake override, he whispered. It's the same. I think someone murdered your father, Killian. And they're trying to kill you too. He sank into his desk chair, looking suddenly vulnerable despite his wealth and power. Archer, he said quietly. It has to be Archer. He's the only one with access, with motive. If I die or step down, he gets controlling shares of the company. Marcus arrived within minutes of Cassidy's urgent call. They gathered in Killian's office. The crash investigation files spread across the desk like evidence in a murder case. I should have seen it, Marcus said, his voice heavy with guilt. I was there that day. Your father's crash looked wrong. The way the car behaved, the timing. But Archer convinced me it was grief talking, that investigating would destroy the company's reputation and hurt you when you were already devastated. Killian stared at the older man. You suspected something? Your father and Archer were arguing in the months before the crash. I heard them one night, your father questioning some of Archer's contracts. Something about technology sales to foreign governments, blurred lines into weapons applications. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. Your father was going to cut Archer out, expose the illegal deals. Then the crash happened, and Archer stepped up to save the company. Why didn't you tell me? Killian's voice was tight, with controlled fury. You were 25 and shattered. Archer was the only stability you had. I thought. Marcus looked away. I thought I was protecting you. I was wrong. Cassidy watched the two men, seeing years of unspoken grief and guilt between them. We need proof, she said, forcing them to focus. Real evidence, not just suspicions and encrypted files. Diego's call came the next morning. Cassidy met him at a secure location, a tech cafe in Pasadena where hackers worked openly and nobody asked questions. You were right to be worried, Diego said, pulling up files on his laptop. The Monaco malware signature matches code from 3 years ago. Look at this. He showed her side-by-side comparisons. The override software for Monaco was identical to fragments recovered from Killian's father's car crash investigation, fragments that had been dismissed as data corruption at the time. Whoever wrote this code did it for both incidents, Diego explained. Same programmer, same method, same goal. Remote control of the brake system, making crashes look like driver error or mechanical failure. Can you trace who installed it? That's the interesting part. The code has fingerprints, digital signatures that link back to Voss Motorsport's internal network, specifically to Archer Kane's secured access credentials. Cassidy's heart pounded. That's evidence. Real evidence. It's a start. But a good lawyer could argue his credentials were stolen, that he was framed. You need him caught in the act. Back at the mansion, Cassidy, Killian, and Marcus formed a plan. It was dangerous, possibly insane, but it was the only way to expose Archer and get justice for Killian's father. Killian would announce he was driving in the Sao Paulo exhibition race in 2 weeks, a high-profile event scheduled the day before the Brazilian Grand Prix. It would be his public demonstration of complete recovery, timed perfectly with the board's final medical evaluation. If Archer was behind the sabotage, he'd have to act. The race was the perfect opportunity, public, high-speed, with cameras everywhere to document Killian's tragic accident. You're using yourself as bait, Marcus said grimly. I want him caught, Killian replied, his voice steel. For my father. For everyone he's hurt. Then we do this smart, Cassidy insisted. We protect you while we expose him. They brought in a trusted external mechanic who examined the Sao Paulo race car thoroughly. Just as they suspected, they found the override device already installed in the computer system. Same signature, same method. The decision was made to leave it in place, but install a dummy relay that would make the override appear functional remotely while actually doing nothing. Hidden cameras went up throughout the garage and pit area. Marcus contacted a federal police contact in Brazil who agreed to have plainclothes officers at the race, ready to move when Archer made his attempt. Everything was set, but the plan had one critical flaw. It required Killian to actually race, to put himself in a car and drive at speeds that could trigger a seizure even without sabotage. That night, lying in Killian's bed with his arms around her, Cassidy voiced her fears. What if you have a seizure during the race? Then you pull me out. I can't pull you out if you're doing 200 kilometers an hour. He kissed her forehead. You've saved me before. You'll save me again. I'm serious, Killian. This could kill you even if Archer's plan fails. I know. He tightened his arms around her. But living in fear, letting him win, giving up the company my father built, that's not living at all. I'd rather die trying to expose the truth than spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have gotten justice. 2 days before they were scheduled to leave for Brazil, an anonymous package arrived addressed to Cassidy. Inside were medical brain scan results, detailed images showing microseizures happening between Killian's major episodes. A typed note accompanied them. He's going to die if he races. And you're helping him kill himself. Stop this before it's too late. A friend. The letterhead was Voss Motorsports. Someone inside the company had sent this. Someone who knew about Killian's condition and wanted to stop the race. Cassidy showed Killian the scans. They were devastating. Proof that his neurological condition was worse than either of them had admitted. You can't race, she said, her voice breaking. This is suicide. I have to. It's the only way to catch him. Then we go to the police with what we have. With what evidence? Encrypted files? Marcus's suspicions? My paranoia? We need to catch him trying again. In Sao Paulo, in front of witnesses. They fought for hours, their first real argument since becoming more than contractual partners. Cassidy screamed that he was choosing revenge over his life. Killian shouted back that this wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about preventing Archer from selling dangerous technology to whoever would pay, about honoring his father's memory. I'm already dying, Killian finally said, his voice quiet and broken. The neurologist gave me 5 years, maybe less. These seizures will eventually kill me. At least this way, my death means something. Cassidy felt tears streaming down her face as she stared at Killian. You don't get to decide your life means nothing if you're not exposing corporate conspiracies. Your life matters, Killian. To me. To Marcus. To everyone who actually cares about you. He crossed to her, cupping her face in his hands. Then help me do this right. Help me catch Archer. Help me stay alive. And stop with this martyr bullshit I've been clinging to. Deal. She wanted to refuse, to drag him away from Sao Paulo and this dangerous plan. But she saw the determination in his eyes, the need for closure, for justice. She understood it because she'd felt the same thing when her father was injured, the desperate need to make something right, even at personal cost. Deal, she whispered. But we do this my way. We catch Archer. We keep you alive. And you stop acting like dying young is somehow noble. They spent the next week in intense preparation. Cassidy adjusted Killian's medication regimen, balancing seizure control against the need for sharp reflexes. She designed specific exercises to strengthen his reaction time and stamina. Marcus coordinated with Brazilian federal police, ensuring everything was in place. Nina became even more suspicious, hovering constantly, her camera always ready. Cassidy caught her photographing medical equipment, making phone calls in Portuguese she didn't think anyone could understand. One afternoon, Cassidy found Nina in her office yet again, this time actively copying files to a USB drive. Enough, Cassidy said, locking the door behind her. Tell me what's really going on. Nina's composure cracked. For the first time since Cassidy had met her, the polished assistant looked genuinely frightened. I can't, Nina said, her voice shaking. You've been reporting to someone. Is it Archer? The way Nina flinched confirmed everything. How long? Cassidy demanded. Nina sank into a chair, the fight draining out of her. 2 years. Since he hired me. Why? The story came out in broken pieces. Nina had been a whistleblower at her previous company, exposing financial fraud by senior executives. She'd done the right thing, reported to authorities, testified in court. But the company had powerful lawyers who destroyed her reputation, blacklisted her in the industry, threatened legal action for corporate espionage. I lost everything, Nina said, tears running down her face. My job, my savings, my future. No one would hire me. Archer found me when I was 3 months behind on rent, about to be evicted. He offered me this position, but he knew about my past. He said if I didn't report on Killian's condition, his relationships, everything happening in this house, he'd make sure I never worked again. He'd finish destroying what little I had left. Cassidy felt her anger shift to something more complex. Nina wasn't a villain. She was a victim, coerced and desperate, much like Cassidy had been when she'd first accepted Killian's deal. Did you know he was trying to kill Killian? Cassidy asked quietly. No. God, no. I thought he just wanted leverage for board meetings, information to use politically. When I overheard you talking about Sao Paulo, about catching Archer, I realized. Nina's voice broke. What have I been helping him do? Cassidy made a decision. She pulled out her phone, set it to record. Tell me everything. Every instruction Archer gave you, every piece of information you passed along, everything you know. I'll make sure Killian doesn't press charges. You testify against Archer, and we protect you. Nina looked up with desperate hope. You do that. I know what it's like to be trapped with no good choices. But this is your chance to do the right thing. Nina's testimony was damning. She described Archer's obsessive interest in Killian's seizure patterns, his questions about when Killian would be most vulnerable, his instructions to falsify certain maintenance records. She'd kept copies of his emails as insurance, encrypted files on a USB drive she'd hidden in case Archer ever turned on her. Marcus reviewed the evidence with federal police contacts. Combined with the telemetry data, the malware analysis, and Nina's testimony, they had a solid case. But they still needed to catch Archer in the act, attempting murder in real time, in front of witnesses. 3 days before Sao Paulo, Cassidy received another devastating blow. Her father's facility called. He'd had a setback. The treatment was working, but he needed an emergency procedure now or the progress would be lost. Cost $75,000 more. Cassidy sat in her room, staring at her bank account. Everything was tied up in this plan, in keeping Killian safe. She didn't have $75,000. That evening, at a pre-Sao Paulo-sponsored dinner at an elegant Los Angeles restaurant, Archer approached Cassidy privately. He'd flown in from New York specifically for the event, charming as always in his expensive suit. Ms. Blake, could I have a word? They stepped into a private alcove, away from the other guests. Cassidy was wearing the wire Marcus had provided, recording everything. I know about your father's situation, Archer said, his voice sympathetic. The emergency procedure he needs. That's a terrible position to be in. How do you know about that? He smiled gently. I make it my business to know things. And I'd like to help. $500,000, cash, transferred today. All you have to do is convince Killian to withdraw from the Sao Paulo race. Cassidy's heart pounded. but she kept her expression neutral. Why do you care so much whether he races? Archer's mask slipped, just for a second. Because I've worked too hard, too long, sacrificed too much to watch him ruin everything with a dramatic suicide attempt. He caught himself immediately, the warmth sliding back into place. I mean, because I care about him. Like a son. Surely you understand. You're a medical professional. You've seen the scans. He's going to kill himself if he gets in that car. Cassidy forced herself to appear conflicted, to let Archer think his offer was tempting. $500,000. Cash. Today. Your father gets his procedure, you get financial security, and Killian lives. Archer leaned closer, his voice dropping to something almost paternal. You're in love with him. I can see it. Don't let pride or misplaced loyalty cost him his life. It was the closest thing to a confession they'd get without him explicitly admitting to murder. Cassidy swallowed hard. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. Your father doesn't have much time. Archer smiled, squeezed her shoulder, and walked back to the dinner party as if they'd been discussing the weather. Later that night, Marcus confirmed the recording was clear. Not quite a full confession, but combined with everything else, it painted a damning picture. Cassidy found Killian in his gym, punishing himself with exercises despite the late hour. She told him about Archer's offer, watching his face harden. He's desperate, Killian said. Good. That means we're close. He also transferred money to cover my father's procedure. Killian looked up sharply. What? Before I could refuse, he had his people process it. The hospital called. The procedure is scheduled for tomorrow. Cassidy's voice shook. He's trying to buy my compliance and make me complicit at the same time. Killian pulled out his phone, fingers moving quickly. I'm transferring $200,000 to the hospital right now. Your father gets the best care regardless of what Archer does. This doesn't touch you. Killian, you don't have to. I'm not doing this because of our contract anymore, remember? He looked at her with fierce intensity. I'm doing this because you matter. Your father matters. I should have asked about him more. Should have made sure you didn't feel trapped by medical bills and desperation. The money transfer completed on his phone. Cassidy felt tears burning behind her eyes. Not because of the money, but because of what it represented. He was choosing her, protecting her, giving her freedom instead of leverage. Thank you, she whispered. He crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. We're going to get through Sao Paulo. We're going to expose Archer. And then we're going to build something real, something that isn't based on contracts or desperation. Okay. She nodded against his chest, letting herself believe it was possible. The flight to Sao Paulo was tense. Marcus coordinated with Brazilian authorities constantly. Nina sat quietly, no longer photographing everything, looking smaller somehow, without her armor of professional polish. Killian stared out the window, his jaw tight with anticipation. Cassidy tried not to think about the brain scans, about the micro-seizures, about all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. Autodromo Jose Carlos Pace was already buzzing with activity when they arrived. The exhibition race was major news. Killian Voss's return to driving, happening the day before the Brazilian Grand Prix. Media from around the world had descended on Sao Paulo. The board members began arriving, checking into luxury hotels, preparing for their final evaluation of Killian's fitness to lead Voss Motorsports. Everything was coming to a head. In Killian's private trailer the morning of the race, Cassidy performed her final medical checks. His vitals were good, his medication perfectly balanced, his reflexes as sharp as they'd been in weeks. But she couldn't shake her anxiety. I know about your father's procedure, Killian said suddenly. It went well. He's in recovery. Cassidy's head snapped up. How? I've been getting updates. Wanted to make sure everything was handled. He took her hands in his. This isn't part of our contract. This isn't me buying your loyalty. This is because you chose to stay, you chose to help me, you chose me. I wanted to do the same. She kissed him then, desperate and loving, possibly a goodbye. Promise me you'll be careful out there. I promise. He pulled back, studying her face like he was memorizing it. If something goes wrong, nothing's going wrong. We've planned for everything. But if it does, I need you to know, these last few months with you have been the only real thing in my life since my father died. Whatever happens today, that was worth it. Cassidy wanted to argue, to tell him nothing was worth dying for, but his radio crackled. It was time. The grandstands were packed. 15 laps around the 4.309-kilometer circuit. 8 drivers total, All Formula One veterans doing the exhibition for charity and publicity. Killian would start third position. Cassidy positioned herself in the pit area, her tablet showing Killian's vitals from the monitoring device on his wrist. Marcus was in a hidden security room with Brazilian federal police, watching camera feeds from every angle. Nina sat with the police as well, ready to identify Archer's actions and testify. In the VIP box high above the track, Archer sat among board members and sponsors, a tablet discreetly on his lap. The race began with a thunderous roar. 15 cars screaming around the iconic Brazilian circuit, and Cassidy's eyes were locked on the number 17 car, Killian's. Lap 3. He was driving beautifully, his old skill undeniable. He'd moved up to second position, threading through traffic like the champion he'd once been. Lap 5. Cassidy watched Archer on the security feed Marcus was sending to her phone. He pulled out his tablet, fingers moving across the screen. He was attempting to activate the override. On Archer's screen, the command showed as successfully sent. He smiled slightly, but nothing happened to Killian's car. The dummy relay was working. Archer thought he'd taken control, but the car remained perfectly responsive to Killian's commands. Lap 7. Federal police began moving toward the VIP box. Archer noticed, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion to dawning realization. He stood abruptly, trying to leave. Board members looked confused. Police blocked the exits. On the track, Killian was racing flawlessly, moving into first position on lap 10. Cassidy's eyes were locked on her medical monitor, watching for any sign of seizure activity. The arrest happened quickly. Brazilian federal police surrounded Archer in the VIP box, their movements efficient and professional. Cassidy watched on the security feed as they showed him the garage camera footage of him accessing Killian's car, the malware signatures, the override attempt he'd just made on his tablet. Nina stepped forward, her testimony adding weight to the evidence. Board members watched in stunned silence as Archer Kane, trusted partner, family friend, pillar of Voss Motorsports, was handcuffed. His face went cold with rage as he realized the trap had closed around him. He'd been so confident, so certain his plan would work. Now cameras were capturing his arrest, broadcasting it to the world. But on the track, something was going wrong. Lap 11. Cassidy's eyes snapped to her medical monitor. Killian's neural activity was spiking abnormally, the patterns she'd learned to dread showing up in sharp peaks. A seizure was beginning. "Killian, pull in," she screamed into the radio. Now, no response. His radio was off. He'd turned it off before the race, knowing she'd try to stop him if anything seemed wrong. Lap 12. On the track, Killian was fighting his own body at 200 kilometers per hour. His vision was blurring, his muscles fighting against his commands. But years of training, thousands of hours in race cars, muscle memory honed since childhood, all of it kicked in. He was operating almost unconsciously, his body knowing the track even as his mind fractured. The car wavered slightly but held its line through the fast, sweeping corners that made São Paulo legendary. Cassidy couldn't breathe. She watched the medical data showing a brain under siege while simultaneously watching the car on track maintain impossible precision. He was seizing while driving, and somehow still in control. But it couldn't last. She knew it couldn't last. Cassidy made a split-second decision that could cost her everything. She ran across the pit lane, dangerous, forbidden, alarms blaring immediately. Marshals shouted at her, but she dodged them, jumped the barrier onto the track itself. The crowd gasped. Cameras swung toward her. She was standing at the finish line, waving her arms frantically. Lap 13. Killian's car approached at over 200 kilometers per hour. Through his seizure-blurred vision, he saw a flash of color, a familiar shape. Some deep part of his damaged brain recognized her. Cassidy. He crossed the finish line in second place, then immediately aimed the car toward her. She used hand signals, left, right, slow, guiding him like she'd guided him through countless physical therapy sessions. The car decelerated, swerving into the runoff area. The engine finally cut out, and the vehicle rolled to a stop 20 meters from where Cassidy stood. She sprinted to the car, yanking open the door. Killian collapsed into her arms, barely conscious, his body still trembling with the aftermath of the seizure. "Did we get him?" he managed to ask. Marcus's voice crackled in her earpiece. "We got him. It's over." Medics swarmed around them. Cameras captured everything. Cassidy cradling Killian's head, tears streaming down her face, his hand gripping hers like a lifeline. Board members watched from the VIP box in stunned silence. Archer stood in handcuffs, his face a mask of fury and defeat. The medical team tried to take Killian from her, but he wouldn't let go of her hand. "Stay," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. The Sao Paulo hospital was state-of-the-art, and Killian was given the best care money could provide. The seizure had been severe but not catastrophic. With proper rest and adjusted medication, the neurologist said he'd recover. Cassidy never left his bedside. Marcus brought updates. Archer had been formally charged with 2 counts of attempted murder and 1 count of actual murder. The evidence was overwhelming. Nina's testimony, the garage footage, the malware signatures, the encrypted files showing years of illegal weapons technology sales. The board held an emergency meeting while Killian was still sedated. Their decision was unanimous. Killian was medically unfit to race professionally, but his judgment in trusting Cassidy, in choosing survival over pride, in exposing corruption within his own company, all of it demonstrated the kind of leadership Voss Motorsports needed. He would remain CEO. The company was his. When Killian woke, Cassidy was there, holding his hand. "We won," she told him softly. "Archer's in custody. The board voted to keep you as CEO. It's over." He squeezed her hand weakly. "My father. Justice." Finally, Marcus is already working with prosecutors. They're building a case that should put Archer away for the rest of his life. Killian closed his eyes, tears leaking from the corners. He'd be proud. Dad would be proud. He would be. They stayed in Sao Paulo for 2 weeks, while Killian underwent additional treatment. A risky surgery to address the seizure disorder was performed by one of Brazil's top neurologists. It wasn't a cure, but it was hope, a chance to manage his condition properly, to live without the constant threat of episodes. During his recovery, Cassidy received news from Los Angeles. Her father's procedure had been successful. He was showing remarkable progress, already regaining some sensation and movement in his legs. It wasn't a miracle, but it was everything she'd hoped for. The medical board in California reviewed her case. Her unlicensed practice was a violation, but given the circumstances, the coercion, the desperation, the fact that she'd ultimately helped expose a murderer, they gave her a 60-day suspension and community service rather than permanent revocation. 2 months later, her official physical therapy license arrived in the mail. Cassidy opened a legitimate clinic in downtown Los Angeles, serving the same community she'd been helping illegally. But now she could do it right, with proper credentials and legal protections. Her first patient was her father, who wheeled himself in with a smile that made every sacrifice worth it. Killian threw himself into transforming Voss Motorsports. He shut down Archer's illegal contracts, established ethics oversight, and redirected the company towards sustainable racing technology. He couldn't race professionally anymore, but he could build something meaningful. Marcus was promoted to Chief Security Officer, a position he took with the gravity of someone who'd failed once and refused to fail again. He personally trained a new security team, implementing protocols that would prevent anyone from accessing Voss Motorsports technology for illegal purposes ever again. One afternoon, Cassidy found him at Killian's father's grave in Forest Lawn Memorial Park, laying flowers on the headstone. "I didn't protect you, sir," Marcus said quietly, not seeming surprised by her presence. "But I protected your son. I hope that counts for something." Cassidy placed her hand on his shoulder. "It counts for everything." Nina remained as Killian's assistant, but their relationship had transformed. The fear and manipulation were gone, replaced by mutual respect and honesty. Killian had funded her legal defense, helping clear her record from the whistleblower case that had destroyed her career. She testified at Archer's trial with her head held high, finally able to do the right thing without it costing her everything. "Thank you," she told Cassidy one day at the office, "for giving me a second chance." "We all deserved second chances," Cassidy replied. The trial became international news. Archer Kane, once celebrated as a business genius and racing legend, was exposed as a murderer who'd killed his best friend for control of a company and illegal weapons profits. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: malware signatures, Nina's testimony, financial records showing millions in illegal sales, encrypted communications planning both murder attempts. Archer's expensive lawyers fought hard, But the evidence was insurmountable. He was convicted on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Cassidy attended the sentencing with Killian, watching as the man who'd nearly destroyed everything was led away in handcuffs. Killian's hand found hers, squeezing tight. "Is it wrong that I don't feel satisfaction?" he asked quietly. "Just emptiness." "Justice doesn't always feel good," Cassidy replied. "But it matters anyway." 3 months after the trial, Killian's neurologist delivered news that changed everything. The surgery had been more successful than they'd hoped. While he'd never be cleared for professional racing, the risks were still too high. His seizures had decreased dramatically. With proper medication and stress management, he could live a relatively normal life. "How long?" Killian asked. The doctor smiled. "Barring complications, you could have decades. This isn't a death sentence anymore, Mr. Voss. It's a chronic condition you'll manage, like diabetes or high blood pressure. You're going to be okay." That night, Killian proposed. They were at the Malibu mansion, on the same balcony where they'd first really talked during those early weeks of deception. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, the sunset painting everything gold and pink. "I don't have a ring," Killian admitted. "I didn't plan this. I've been dying for so long, literally and figuratively, that I forgot what it felt like to want a future. You gave me that back." Cassidy's eyes filled with tears. "Killian, you could have walked away so many times. When you found out about the seizures, when Archer tried to bribe you, when I was using myself as bait in Sao Paulo, you stayed. Not because of a contract or money, but because you chose to. I want to spend whatever time I have left choosing you, every single day." He pulled out a simple platinum band. Nothing fancy, just clean and honest. "Cassidy Blake, will you marry me? For real this time, not for cameras or board meetings, but because we actually love each other." She laughed through her tears. "Yes. God, yes." The ring slid onto her finger perfectly, and they kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the mansion. No cameras, no press, no performance. Just family and the few friends who'd stood by them through everything. Marcus walked Cassidy down the aisle since her father still couldn't walk that far unaided, though he was making progress every day. Nina served as Killian's best woman, a choice that raised eyebrows, but felt right to everyone who knew their story. Cassidy's father sat in the front row, tears streaming down his face as he watched his daughter marry a man who'd saved her in more ways than one, just as she'd saved him. "I knew you were special," her father told Killian at the reception. "But I didn't know you were crazy enough to let my daughter boss you around." "She's good at it," Killian replied with a grin. "Someone needs to keep me from doing stupid things." "That's a full-time job," Marcus added, raising his champagne glass. Life settled into something Cassidy had never experienced before, normalcy. She ran her clinic, treating patients legally and making a real difference in her community. Killian led Voss Motorsports into a new era, focusing on sustainable technology and ethical business practices. They went to therapy, both individually and together, working through the trauma of everything they'd experienced. The deception, the danger, the complicated way their relationship had begun, all of it required processing and healing. Some days were harder than others. Killian still had occasional seizures, though they were manageable now. Cassidy still sometimes woke up in a panic, afraid she'd find him unconscious or worse. But they were building something real, something that didn't require lies or performance. One evening, almost a year after Sao Paulo, Cassidy found Killian in his garage working on a vintage race car he'd bought as a project. It wasn't meant for competition, just something to tinker with, to maintain his connection to racing without the danger. "Want to go for a drive?" he asked, wiping grease from his hands. "Only if I'm driving," she teased. "You don't even have a racing license." Minor detail. They ended up taking his regular car instead, driving up the Pacific Coast Highway as the sun set. No destination, no agenda, just the two of them and the open road. The drive along the Pacific Coast Highway had become their ritual, a way to decompress, to remember how far they'd come, to simply exist together without the weight of their past pressing down on them. Cassidy looked over at Killian as he drove, his profile relaxed in the golden light. He caught her staring and smiled, the genuine smile she'd fallen in love with, so different from the arrogant mask he'd worn when they first met. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How we started." That night in your office when you basically blackmailed me into this whole mess. I prefer to think of it as an employment opportunity. She laughed. An employment opportunity that included fake dating, attempted murder, and international corporate espionage. When you put it that way, it does sound a bit excessive. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the ocean waves crashing against the cliffs below. Eventually, Killian pulled over at a scenic overlook, not far from where they'd nearly crashed during that terrifying night that seemed like a lifetime ago. I think about that night sometimes, Killian said, as if reading her thoughts. When I seized behind the wheel and you grabbed it, saved both our lives. You barely knew me, had every reason to let me crash and take your problems with me. But you didn't. I'm a physical therapist. Saving people is kind of my thing. It's more than that. He turned to face her fully. You saw something in me worth saving when I'd given up on myself. You fought for me even when I wasn't fighting for myself. Cassidy reached for his hand. You did the same for me. Gave me back my career, my father's health, my future. We saved each other, Killian. That's what partners do. He kissed her softly, then pulled back with a mischievous glint in his eye. Want to drive? Your car? You never let anyone drive your car. You're not anyone. You're my wife. He opened the door, gesturing for her to switch seats. Besides, you already saved my life while I was behind the wheel. Seems only fair you get a turn actually driving. They switched positions, and Cassidy adjusted the seat, feeling the power of the engine humming beneath her. It wasn't the Lamborghini from that first terrifying night, but it was still far more car than she was used to. Easy, Killian said as she pulled back onto the highway. This isn't a therapy session where you push me to my limits. Are you seriously giving me driving advice? Professional hazard. I've been racing since I was 6, and I've been keeping you alive for the past year and a half. I think I can handle a drive up the coast. They bantered as the coastline blurred past, the easy rhythm of a couple who'd been through hell together and come out stronger. Cassidy felt the tension she'd been carrying for months finally releasing. This was what healing looked like, not dramatic gestures or grand revelations, but simple moments of joy and normalcy. Her phone buzzed with a message from her father. Walked 20 feet today with just the cane. Your old man's getting there. Love you, Cass. She showed Killian, who grinned. He's progressing faster than any of his doctors predicted. Stubbornness runs in the family. I've noticed. As they drove, Cassidy reflected on everything that had changed. Her clinic was thriving, treating over 50 patients a week. Her father was regaining mobility, exceeding every expectation. Killian had transformed Voss Motorsports into a company his father would be proud of, ethical, innovative, focused on pushing racing technology forward without compromising integrity. Marcus had become like family, joining them for dinners and holidays, finally allowing himself to grieve properly for Killian's father while celebrating that he'd protected the son. Nina had found her footing again, her confidence restored, no longer looking over her shoulder in fear. Even the ending of Archer's story brought a measure of peace. He was serving his life sentence in a maximum security prison, his legacy destroyed, his illegal empire dismantled. Justice had been served, even if it couldn't bring back the 3 years Killian had lost believing his father's best friend cared about him. The sun was setting as they reached their destination, a private beach Killian owned, accessible only by a narrow road most people didn't know existed. They parked and walked down to the sand, their shoes left behind in the car. The water was cold when it rushed over their feet, but neither of them cared. They stood at the edge of the Pacific, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. I never thought I'd have this, Killian said quietly. A future. Someone who loves me for who I am, not what I can give them or how I can benefit them. Just this. Simple happiness. It's not simple, Cassidy corrected. We fought like hell for this. For the right to stand here and watch the sunset without fear or deception or someone trying to kill you. Fair point. He pulled her closer. But it's ours. We earned it. They stayed until the stars came out, talking about plans for the future. Expanding Cassidy's clinic. Killian's idea to create a foundation supporting people injured in racing accidents. Maybe, eventually, starting a family of their own. The drive back to Malibu was peaceful, unhurried. When they pulled into the mansion's driveway, Cassidy looked at the glass and steel structure that had once felt like a gilded cage. Now it felt like home. You know what the best part of all this is? She asked as they walked inside. What? I'm not here because of a contract. I'm not here because you're paying me. I'm here because I choose to be every single day. And you choose me back. Killian stopped in the doorway, pulling her into his arms. Every single day, he agreed. For the rest of our lives. Cassidy Blake had walked into Killian Voss's world expecting a simple transaction. Money for services, deception for mutual benefit. Instead, she'd found love in the most unexpected place, with a man who'd been dying and learned to live, with a partner who'd been broken and helped her heal. They'd both been saved not by grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but by the quiet choice to keep showing up for each other, day after day, crisis after crisis. Not perfectly, not without scars, but authentically, honestly, together. And sometimes, that was the only happy ending that really mattered. If you made it this far, thank you for going on this journey with Cassidy and Killian. Their story reminds us that sometimes the people we least expect become the ones who change our lives forever. If you love this story, smash that like button and subscribe for more thrilling tales of romance, danger, and second chances. Drop a comment below telling us what you thought. What was your favorite moment? And most importantly, where are you watching from? We love hearing from you all around the world. Until next time, remember, the best love stories are the ones we fight for. See you in the next video.